So I don't bait you. Good morning again. My name is Lee Tyler. I'm here to introduce a great champion here, and his name's Carlin. Carlin, how do you say that? Ichwa, the Wilderness Society Alaska State Director. Carlin works as the organizational lead for the Alaska program, focusing on policy, science, indigenous rights, community-led conservation, and climate change, among many other responsibilities. Carlin has undergraduate degrees in Alaska and is an Alaska native. Carlin has undergraduate degrees in Alaska Native Studies and Political Science from UAF and a law degree from Gonzaga University. Right on, go Zags. And then Mita DeWitt is a how do you say that? Tlingit? Tlingit, sorry. I'm bad. I have no glasses here. Traditional healer, ethno-herbalist, multidisciplinary artist, community leader, educator and advocate of indigenous health practices, as well as environmental stewardships. She's also a champion. Appreciate it. Thank you. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Liwan. I've been looking forward to that introduction because if you ever get a chance to sit and talk with Liwan, it's always a treat. So good storyteller. Good morning, Carlin.
Good morning, Mita. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon.
We're here to talk about the Imago Initiative, and I'm going to ask Carlin to open us up and start the conversation. And we have a lot of pictures to get through. We have about 25 minutes, so we got a pretty good amount of time to tell a story and talk a little bit. So go ahead, Carlin.
Thank you, Mita. Good morning, good afternoon. Mita and I have been invited to brief you on our Imago Initiative and a partner trip that we recently took into the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge last summer from July 7th through 14th. We brought Indigenous and conservation partners with us into the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for 8 days of ceremony, healing, brainstorming, and place-based dialogues. The Imago Initiative is pursuing a new approach for Arctic refuge Indigenous protection, but first we'd like to tell you a little bit more about ourselves. And before we get to that, next slide, please. We'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm here in Anchorage on the traditional homelands of the Dena'ina people, and we give gratitude to the original stewards of the lands on which we live, the Dena'ina people here in Anchorage, and also the Inupiaq and the Gwich'in peoples for stewarding the land on which we work. The Wilderness Society recognizes Native American and Indigenous peoples as the longest serving stewards of the land. We respect our inherent sovereignty and self-determination and honor treaty rights, including reserve rights that exist off-reservation. Next slide, please. We have a staff of 6 folks here in Anchorage, and 3 of us that you see pictured here work on the Imago Initiative. Myself, Carlin Ichak, my Inupiaq name is Nahiak Ichuahak, and my father, my grandparents are from Utqiagvik originally, Wilbur and Cora Ichuahak, and on my mom's side, Norman and Margaret Irvin, originally from upstate New York. And our deputy director is Danielle Stickman, and I'll pass the mic to Mita to introduce herself.
Yes, thank you, Liwan, for doing the introduction. So I'll just do my traditional introduction. Mita DeWitt Yucha Dosak Klinget Kleinach Setzinach Yucha Dosak Nanyaina Chatsati Kachari Adi Chachati Shtakin Kwan Ayachat. I'd like to say thank you to the Spokane people and the Coeur d'Alene tribes as well for being in these traditional homelands. And I'm over by Gonzaga, Carlin, by your alma mater. And I normally live and work on Dena'ina Ethlana, so Gunashtish to the Dena'ina peoples of Anchorage, Alaska. And my family comes from Southeast Alaska, from Wrangell and Yakutat and Prince of Wales. So I am a specialist with the Wilderness Society Alaska office that's focusing directly on Imago. And we'll talk about that initiative through here, but the simplest way to put it is indigenizing conservation. As we heard earlier today, Wilson Justin said that term wilderness was offensive when they first heard it because our lands were not wild. We had a deep interconnected relationship with them. And we as Indigenous people know this. And conservation, especially the Wilderness Society, is one of the oldest conservation groups in the United States, and Carlin will do more introduction on them. But they realized that the way forward is to partner with tribes for the highest and best version of conservation in the future. So I'll hand it back to you, Carlin. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Mita. I'm excited that you're there in Spokane and close to my alma mater. Some good memories there. Before we start, as Mita mentioned, we'd like to tell you a bit about the Wilderness Society and who we are. The Wilderness Society was founded in 1935 and has led the effort to permanently protect over 109 million acres of wilderness in 44 states. Our mission is to unite people and protect America's wild places. And we do this with a commitment to build meaningful relationships and co-creating solutions. Our values are trust and collaboration, community and commitment. Next slide, please. Solutions and science. And we blend all of these together. And as Mita mentioned, we're working to also include and incorporate traditional Indigenous knowledge and wisdom.
Next slide, please.
The Wilderness Society was founded by many famous people, including Bob Marshall. The photo here you see are some of our founders, Aldo Leopold. We have Olaus and Marty Muri in this photo. On the end on the right there is Howard Zanheiser, who drafted the Wilderness Act. And many of these folks are well known and have been instrumental in many of the protected areas that we have now in the United States, including the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and many places in Alaska. So we just wanted to share with you this photo and let you know that, as Mita mentioned, TWS is striving to be more inclusive and equitable in conservation. We're working to transform conservation policy and practice so all people benefit equitably from public lands, and that the conservation movement is more inclusive of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. This photo of our founders was taken maybe at a time when gender and racial equity was not high on a priority list. It's unlikely that when this photo was taken that our founders were concerned about the current climate crisis. They may have been unaware of it. It could also be argued that the rights of Indigenous people were not being addressed nor considered when creating protected areas and drafting the Wilderness Bill. Mita and I and many others at the Wilderness Society are working to change that narrative with the Imago Initiative.
Next slide, please.
Next slide, please. TWS has undergone a internal diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice movement where we're stepping up our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And this impacts how we work internally, which in turn is allowing us to have this outward manifestation of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in the forms of things like the Imago Initiative.
And so that's where we're at today, is this paradigm shift. Like I said earlier, conservation, especially those who've been around for a very long time, realize that the partnership with Indigenous people, the original stewards, is the most profound way to help not only protect land, but heal land, right? Because we have hundreds of years of extractive activities on our lands that have caused issues. There's also the issues of locking up land in protection and not having this Indigenous stewardship. We see that with the areas that used to have traditional burns, and now they're not burning, so we have these huge wildfires over and over and over again. We're seeing how our Indigenous knowledge is a rightful place in this conversation, so that way, as we move forward into the future, we can have healthy spaces that we engage with again in relationship. Next slide, please. Carlin?
Yes, thank you, Mita. And as Mita said, we're trying to reimagine our approach to conservation, looking at the fact that Indigenous people live everywhere there's public land. We all get on these meetings and we hear these land acknowledgements, and we're trying to put that into practice. We want to do more than just land acknowledgements. We want to recognize the sovereignty and self-determination, the rights of the Indigenous people that we've held since time immemorial. And we want the conservation groups and the government to incorporate that into any protected areas. The Imago Initiative is named after the imaginal cells that exist in caterpillars, which allows them to transform into butterflies. This transformative ideology was inspired by well-known Indigenous leader Winona LaDuke. Winona was giving a presentation at a Just Transition Summit in Fairbanks and was talking about this transition. And we love that analogy and asked her if we could use this word Imago for the Imago Initiative. The Imago Initiative is an on-the-ground investment in inclusivity and equity, one that would re-envision how protected areas are designed, how conservation is accomplished, and who it benefits. We believe that we must pivot our focus and approach from our proactive long-term goal of permanent protection on the coastal plain and beyond. By making protected areas more durable, recognizing the rights of Indigenous inhabitants, and providing fair and equitable benefits for Inupiaq and Gwich'in peoples alike, we could help set a transformational example for the conservation movement in Alaska and nationally, and help advance social justice for Indigenous communities.
Next slide, please.
Mita?
So Carlin is Inupiaq, as he said earlier, and he comes from Nome and has family in Kaktovik. And the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is one of the largest spaces that the Wilderness Society is working to protect. We also know that the Gwich'in people have been working to protect this area for well over 40 years. And the Inupiaq people border on the other side. So there's levels of protocol to engage in this process, not only between Indigenous and conservation, but even Indigenous and Indigenous, right? And so the Imago Initiative isn't purely just a political campaign or a social movement campaign. Part of this process is that we also have to engage in healing activities, and not in the Western sense, but in the traditional sense. And so we went into the Arctic Refuge this last summer. It's actually the third trip into the refuge. Carlin already did preliminary trips going to Kaktovik and talking with community members, and then also going into the Arctic Refuge. And so this one was a much larger, and we took 22 people in. Next slide, please. In the process of reimagining conservation today. So we had people who are Inupiaq, and we have people who are Gwich'in. We also had a lone Tlingit person there. And you can see we have, women of color and non-Native people there as well, so that we could be in community, right? Because we know as we transform and go forward, we're not going to a pre-contact setting where it's just our own Native person and group in a community, right? We're going forward with mixed communities. And so that's a reality that we have to acknowledge in this process. And so this is that, that last picture that we saw with the founders, right? This is the new vision, the new face of coming together. Next slide, please. Or Carlin, did you want to talk about that last picture? You good?
Oh, sure. I was
Nope.
I was nervous applying for a job in conservation because Indigenous people, we haven't always had a great relationship with conservation groups and the government, as you know, and we're all working hard to change that. And when I really thought about it, we have more in common with conservation groups, but there are some things that we're working to change with the Imago Initiative, and most conservation groups are open to that. And one is the diversity, and you can see in this photo that we did a just the position of the photo of the founders and tried to bring with us more diversity in gender and race, and that's a big part of the Imago Initiative, is bringing together people who haven't traditionally been working together, and doing that in the refuge, on the ground, in this sacred space where we connect with the land and with each other. And the protection of the Arctic refuge has been central to the Wilderness Society's history since 1935, but our ancestors have been protecting this area for 10,000 years. There's only, while we were there this summer, we realized that the Fish and Wildlife and the management agencies only have caribou and grizzly bears and wolves and wolverines and thousands of birds to protect, because our ancestors did such a great job living in harmony and only taking what they needed and sharing with others and being original stewards of the land. Nita?
Yes, thank you, Carlin. All right, next slide, please. So the short-term goal, learn and understand how we, and this is in a conservation framework, how we got it wrong in the past, and then how to figure out how to get it right in the future. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. I don't want to say it any louder, it'll be awkward. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so we, following traditional protocols, we wanted to make sure, you can leave it on the slide, it's okay. We wanted to make sure that we engaged our Indigenous people and we had permission. So we talked to the surrounding communities and got permission from the groups to go in. And invited Sarah James in with us. And we made sure that we weren't in the 1002 area, which is what is actually the calving grounds for the porcupine caribou herd. And there's certain protocols that you don't disrupt the calving grounds when you go into their space, because it's sacred, it's where life is being created. And so we were 80 miles in at the Hulu Hulu River, which is up in the mountains. And that was very intentional. It's also halfway between the Nupiaq and the Gwich'in people. So this right here is overlooking the valley, and you can't see it, but the camp is down there. And while we were there, we made sure to practice a leave no trace. So carry everything in and carry everything out, including human waste. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't have an impact in that space. You couldn't tell that we were even there. It looked actually better than when we got there, because we found, like, it's by airstrip, so we found little pieces of trash and stuff and picked them up. Next slide, please. So as we came together, we wanted to do this in an Indigenous way. We're going out on the land. There's no cell phone service, no Wi-Fi, no amenities whatsoever. It's literally, a natural space with an airstrip and a river, right? So we wanted to do this on native time in a good way. So instead of 8 to 5, 15-minute breaks, which we're doing now, right? It's the way that we work together in a Western system. It's just a different way. So while we were there, we had an agenda, but we also wanted to make sure that we traveled together as a group, right? So traditional style, like you don't walk faster than your elders or your children can walk. And so we held the 8 days in a traditional talking or listening circle structure. The first 2 days was to get to know each other, get to know the land. The second 2 days was coming together and telling story and about the topic and why we're here together. And then the last 2 days, 3 days was about what are we going to do about it? How do we want to imagine conservation? And it's important that we're doing this on the land because we think differently, we feel differently when we're out on the land. And those, even just having a vista that's far away actually changes our brain chemistry as human beings, and not just Indigenous people, but all people. So being able to be out there with we saw caribou, and next slide, please. And this right here, this is Robert Thompson and Sarah James coming together, Nupaq and Gwich'in greeting each other. They've both been working to protect the refuge for decades, and this was the first time that they got to spend time together. Waking up to herds on the mountains of 1,500, 2,000 caribou, and having elders wake us up at like 5 in the morning. Hey, you got to get out here. You got to see this. It's like, everybody just went to bed 45 minutes ago, but okay. I'm coming into this space. Next slide, please. And really taking that time to listen to elders' story, right? So we didn't start at 8, we didn't end at 5. I think that last night we went till 3 a.m. We actually had a talking stick that was gifted to us to borrow from Lucy Beach's mother. And so Marcia, she let us use that to hold this space and to go into talking circle and creating that container to emote and heal and come together as a group. Next slide, please. All right, Carlin, and I'm gonna go through the next few slides kind of quickly, but go ahead and tell some stories.
Yeah, thank you, Mita. I think all of you are familiar with some of the assimilation and termination policies and legislation of the past and the historical trauma that has come with that. In fact, I know all of you are familiar with that, and that is part of the root cause or pain point that we're trying to center our healing on with these trips, with our place-based trips and with our dialogue, and bringing people together and connecting each other with the land and with the animals and with each other, and having safe and brave space for that healing, because the historical trauma associated, as you know, with the dispossession of land, taking away the land from the Indigenous people or taking Indigenous people away from the land, impacted a whole long history of assimilation, taking away of the language and traditional hunting practices and our spiritual practices and many other things that I don't have to tell you about because you all know. And those are the things that we're trying to focus on and to connect with each other. And for me, an aha moment on this trip was recognizing that many of our conservation partners have similar healing journeys to go on as well. Some of our conservation partners were the children of oil executives or congressional leaders that have been pushing to open the refuge to oil and gas drilling. So it was an aha moment for me to realize and be mindful that Indigenous people, we aren't the only ones going through a healing process. And so in trying to make this paradigm shift to a more inclusive protected areas, we're looking at models from all over the world as well. Many of you have heard of the Indigenous protected and conserved areas in Canada, in Australia, Brazil, Russia. And so we're looking at over 30 different models to see what were some of the lessons learned or best practices. But we're also holding these brainstorming sessions where we're trying to come up with new ideas. What are new creative ideas? And Imago has become an acronym for some of the high-level things we're listening to that people would like to see. Indigenous management, access, governance, guardianship or stewardship, and ownership. And it doesn't have to be land back ownership, could be shared ownership or concurrent ownership and concurrent management. So it's been really interesting to hear folks' different ideas. And here you can see we also did some singing and dancing and connecting through song and storytelling as well. Mita?
So traditional spa day, and really making that activity of getting connected to the land, building it into our time together instead of something that's like over there that you might do in your spare time. So really making sure that we had time, in the mornings and the evenings, which are pretty subjective considering we're above the Arctic Circle in the summer, right? So it's actually never gets really dark. But there's certain times where animals come out, and then there's certain times of day, like every day at 2 p.m., the wind changed directions and the weather changed. So listening to those rhythms of the animals and the weather, in when we could go out and go just play and be in that space together. Next slide, please. And then, when the weather shifted, coming together inside, because our traditional houses, this is a Lavu, and it was adapted, we borrowed it from the Sami people to take up into the refuge, because Carlin wanted to be mindful that we didn't have the big white tents like the miners have. It didn't look like a colonized space. So we had the Lavu there that we would come in together, and it was red. It was like being in a womb. And it was beautiful and warm, and Carlin tended the fire and made sure that we had coffee and tea, and somebody used that oven and made chocolate chip cookies. Somebody was, the people who go out on the land all the time were absolutely floored because there was so much care that was put into it by the group organizing this space that everybody's needs were met. And not only were they met, but also that caring of sharing with each other. People brought moose and salmon and seal oil and blubber to eat. And we one day, because aches and pains, we went out and gathered traditional plants, and I put them on the stove while we were telling story in oil so that they could steep. And then after we got done with a round of hard story, we passed this oil around. Everybody rubbed it on an owie, right? An ache or a pain. And then that pain would go away. And it went around 3 times because when one went away, then they realized that they hurt somewhere else. And they would put it on somewhere else. And then would go around and go around. And it was so good at relieving that pain and comforting that it helped us transition in from hard stories into the next chapter of healing dialogue. Next slide, please. And then on the last day, we came together to brainstorm. So we didn't even have the pens and papers out until the very last day together. And we sat out in the sun and wrote for hours to envision what does the future look like for Indigenous conservation coming together. All right, next slide, please. All right, Carlin, we only have about 2 minutes left. I'm going to hand this over to you to talk about this slide and then how people can engage.
Great, thank you, Mita. We have over 55 notes and have started compiling a lot of the data what we've been collecting from these place-based trips. And it's a scaffolding approach where we continue having more and more trips and bringing in more and more people or different folks. And we'll continue to be doing this summer as well. So next slide, please. There's different ways you can engage with the Imago Initiative. You can connect us to Alaska Native leaders in the Arctic or the Gwich'in Nation or on the North Slope. That'd be very helpful. The tension between corporations, Native corporations and tribal governments, and the Native village of Kaktovik is kind of split on whether to develop or to protect, and we could always use help. We want to hear from the corporate leaders too. We want to hear from everybody to get all different ideas so that this is more inclusive in terms of the solutions. You can support the work of Indigenous partners and elevate the Imago Initiative for your own narrative for elevating Indigenous rights. So we want to thank you for your time and thank you for inviting us, and thank you, Mita, for all your leadership. We couldn't do this without you.
Ganesh Carlin, and thank you for joining us this morning, and I'll see you again in a week.
Keep up the great work. Kuyana.